I was just staring at this massive stack of research we pulled for today's deep dive.
Oh, yeah, it's quite a stack.
It really is. And usually when we prep for these discussions with you, we're looking for nuance, right?
Right.
We're looking for the gray areas in history or maybe some complicated science. But today we are looking at a figure who is almost aggressively devoid of nuance.
That is a very good way to put it.
He is neon. He is loud. He is literally a caricature come to life.
He is, and yet the deeper you actually dig into the source material we have today.
Which is extensive.
Oh, absolutely extensive. We're talking legal documents, court transcripts, detailed biographical data. And the more you read through it all, the more you realize that the caricature you mentioned is hiding a lot.
The sunglasses and the mullet.
Exactly. The sunglasses, the mullet, the leather vests. It's all covering up a life that is just a complete mess of contradictions.
It's actually a fascinating case study in duality. Calling it a mess is probably putting it lightly. For you listening, we are talking about Duane Chapman, better known as Dog the Bounty Hunter.
The dog.
Right. And I think for most people listening, your brain immediately goes to the meme version of this guy.
Oh, sure.
The gravity-defying hair, the feathers tied into it, the Oakley sunglasses, usually a cigarette dangling from his mouth while he tackles someone in a Hawaiian parking lot.
And then he tells them, "Go with Christ, brah."
Yes. That's the exact line everyone knows. That's the cultural footprint.
It is.
But what we are unpacking today is the actual machinery behind that meme. Because when you look at the biographical breakdown, this is a man who became the literal face of American law and order.
Quite literally chasing fugitives on national television for a living.
Exactly. But he is a man who cannot legally own a firearm.
Right. A convicted felon hunting other felons. That is the core irony at the center of his entire existence.
And it doesn't stop there. We're talking about a man who loudly preaches the gospel of Jesus Christ while living a personal life that makes, I don't know, a soap opera look like a stable family dynamic.
It's incredibly chaotic.
We're talking about murder convictions in Texas. We're talking about international diplomatic crises involving Condoleezza Rice.
Which, by the way, is a sentence I never thought I'd say in a biography of a reality TV star, but here we actually are.
I know, it's wild. So our mission for this deep dive is to completely strip away the reality TV editing. We have to look at the raw sources.
We want to understand the mechanics of how a high school dropout and convicted murderer built a massive media empire.
And we need to answer a pretty uncomfortable question for you to think about as we go through this. Is this story a redemption arc? Or is he a symptom of a justice system that's somehow turned into pure entertainment?
And to really do that, we have to completely ignore the TV show for a moment.
We have to go back.
We have to go way back to the beginning. Because you don't just wake up one day and become a larger-than-life bounty hunter. You have to be formed by your environment.
Right. And the making of Duane Chapman starts in Denver, Colorado.
Back in 1953.
1953. And right out of the gate, looking at his childhood in the sources, you see this massive, glaring split in his reality.
It's the classic nature versus nurture battle, but it's playing out in a single living room.
Explain that dynamic for the listener.
On one side, you have his mother, Barbara Darlene Chapman. The biographical sources describe her as a very devout, very rigidly structured woman.
She was a Sunday school teacher, right?
Yes, she was associated with the Assemblies of God. So young Duane is exposed to this intense religious moralizing, this constant presence of salvation and sin being discussed right at the breakfast table.
But then on the other side of that same breakfast table, you have his father.
Wesley. Wesley was a welder who eventually pivoted to becoming a bail bondsman.
Which is an incredible bit of foreshadowing for the entire story.
It really is. But the home environment itself was volatile. Chapman has stated on the record multiple times that his father was physically abusive.
So young Duane is growing up in this absolute pressure cooker.
Intense piety on one hand and intense violence on the other.
That is a deeply confusing way to grow up. It's essentially, Jesus loves you, but you're going to get a beating if you step out of line.
Exactly. And psychologically speaking, that kind of environment creates a desperate need for escape. It creates a need to find a tribe that actually makes sense to you.
And for a teenage Duane Chapman in the late 1960s, that tribe wasn't, the high school debate club.
No, definitely not. It was the Devils Diciples.
And we should clarify for the listener, because we're looking at the spelling in the documents, that is disciples spelled intentionally wrong.
Right. D-I-C-I-P-L-E-S.
Why do they do that?
It's a very common trope in outlaw motorcycle culture. It's a deliberate rejection of societal norms.
Even grammar norms.
even grammar norms. It's their way of stamping the world with, "We don't follow your rules." So at 15 years old, Chapman runs away from home and fully immerses himself in this outlaw counterculture.
He's looking for brotherhood?
He's looking for protection and brotherhood, and he finds it in an organization that operates explicitly outside the confines of the law.
But the real turning point here, the actual moment that changes his trajectory from just being a rebellious teen biker to becoming a convicted felon, that happens in 1976.
Yes.
And this is the part of the story that often gets completely glossed over in the flashy reality show intros. We really need to drill down into what happened in Pampa, Texas, September 15th, 1976.
This is the critical incident of his life. Honestly, if this night doesn't happen, we probably never hear of Dog the Bounty Hunter.
Set the scene for us.
Chapman is 23 years old. He is hanging out with a group of 3 other people: Donald Kuykendall, Cheryl Fisher, and Ruben Garza.
And according to the police reports, they aren't just out for a joyride. They have a specific target in mind.
Right. They make a collective decision to rob a man named Jerry Bowers Oliver. Now, it's highly important to note the context of the victim here, based on the records.
Right, because he wasn't just a random guy on the street.
No. Oliver was known in the local area as a marijuana dealer. This was a targeted robbery. In criminal slang, it was a rip.
Which is the oldest play in the criminal handbook. You target the drug dealer because the drug dealer can't exactly call the cops to report his illegal drugs were stolen.
Precisely. So, late that night, the 4 of them drive to Oliver's house. And here's where the legal distinction becomes incredibly important for literally Chapman's entire future.
Okay, let's break this down carefully.
The car pulls up to the house. Chapman, Fisher, and Garza wait in the vehicle. Kuykendall is the one who actually gets out of the car and goes up to the door.
So we want to be crystal clear for you listening. Chapman is sitting in the car outside. He is not inside the house. He is not in the room where the actual violence happens.
That is correct. But inside the house, the robbery goes terribly wrong. There is a physical struggle. Kuykendall is armed with a sawed-off shotgun.
A highly dangerous weapon.
Very. And during the altercation, Kuykendall shoots Oliver. It's a messy, brutal injury to the underarm area. Oliver actually survives the initial shooting, but he tragically dies the very next day in the hospital.
So obviously a murder investigation begins. The police get involved. Eventually they track down the crew.
Yes.
They find Chapman at his house. The records say he actually tries to run out the back door to escape, but they catch him.
They do.
Now, here's the thing that deeply confuses people who aren't lawyers when they hear this story. If Chapman was just waiting in the getaway car, how on earth does he get convicted of first-degree murder?
That is the million-dollar question. And it brings us to a very specific and historically very controversial aspect of the legal system, specifically the Texas law of parties.
Okay, we need to unpack this, because just the name of that sounds intense.
It is codified in Texas Penal Code, Section 7.02. I won't bore you with the dense legal jargon, but essentially, the law states that if you agree to a conspiracy to commit one crime,
Which in this case was the robbery of Jerry Oliver.
exactly, if you agree to that conspiracy, you are criminally responsible for any other offense committed by your co-conspirators.
And any other offense.
Yes, provided that the secondary offense was a foreseeable result of the initial conspiracy.
Foreseeable. So the legal logic applied to Chapman was essentially, you agreed to go rob a known drug dealer. You knew there was a deadly weapon involved. Therefore, you should have reasonably anticipated that someone might get killed.
That's exactly the logic. So you are just as guilty of murder as the guy who actually pulled the trigger.
Wow.
And the jury in 1977 leaned heavily on one very specific, very damning fact that came out in the trial. Chapman had actually supplied the shotgun and the ammunition used in the crime.
He brought the gun.
He provided the means for the murder. So even though he was physically sitting out in the car, legally speaking, the state of Texas viewed his finger as being on the trigger.
He was culpable.
Fully culpable. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 5 years in the Texas State Penitentiary.
Which, just looking at the timeline, 5 years for a first-degree murder conviction seems incredibly light, doesn't it?
It does to modern ears.
Yeah.
But it was the 1970s, and there were various plea deals, sentencing guidelines, and parole nuances involved at the time. He actually ended up serving only about 18 months of that 5-year sentence.
18 months.
But here is the critical takeaway from the source material. The length of the actual time served behind bars doesn't matter nearly as much as the label he walked away with.
The felony conviction.
The felony conviction is for life. This is a permanent stain on his record. This is exactly why, No matter how many fugitives he catches later in life, he can never legally own or possess a firearm.
Which makes his chosen profession incredibly dangerous.
Highly dangerous. And that felony record also causes massive issues with international travel. Specifically, we noted his inability to enter the United Kingdom, which has very strict entry rules, barring anyone with a serious criminal record.
But prison is also where the whole mythology of the dog persona really begins to take root.
It is.
There's a specific story he tells in his biographies, and he tells it often, about this profound epiphany he had while he was locked up in Texas.
Yes. This is the origin story he has very carefully cultivated over the years. Chapman claims that while he was serving his time, another inmate attempted to escape the facility.
Making a run for it.
Right. The inmate was sprinting for the fence. And Chapman says he physically tackled the inmate to the ground to stop him.
But why would he do that? In prison culture, doing that makes you a snitch or an enforcer for the guards.
Well, in his telling of the event, he did it to save the escaping inmate's life. He claimed he saw the armed guards up in the watchtower preparing to open fire, and by tackling the guy, he prevented him from being shot and killed.
That is an incredibly cinematic image. An inmate violently tackling another inmate, but doing it as an act of protection?
And according to Chapman, a corrections officer walked up to him right afterward, threw handcuffs on the guy who tried to escape, and looked at Chapman. The guard allegedly said, "Good job, boy. You realize you can't run, so you might as well catch him."
Wow.
Chapman cites that exact sentence as his light bulb moment, the moment he realized he had a very specific set of physical skills and instincts. He realized he could be on the side of the law hunting down fugitives, rather than being the fugitive himself.
It's almost too perfect a narrative, isn't it?
It really is neat.
Whether it happened exactly word for word that way, or if it's been polished over 40 years of media retelling, it perfectly sets up his next act in life. He gets out of prison, he starts working for his dad, who, remember, is still a bail bondsman.
Right.
And he starts bounty hunting.
And we need to emphasize something important here.
Yeah.
He didn't just become famous overnight. He ground it out for years.
Decades, really.
Decades. He spent the entire 1980s and 1990s deep in the trenches of the commercial bail bond world. Working out of Denver, then eventually moving to Hawaii, he was kicking down doors in low-income housing complexes, dealing with petty criminals, getting maced, getting into street fights.
He was building the dog persona brick by brick through sheer repetition.
Exactly.
But the singular moment that launched him from being a successful local character into an absolute global phenomenon and simultaneously into a massive international legal nightmare was the capture of Andrew Luster.
The Luster case.
This is where the story abruptly shifts from a gritty local biography to an international thriller.
You really cannot overstate how huge the Andrew Luster case was at the time. It feels entirely like a movie script. For any of you listening who might be too young to remember the early 2000s news cycle, we have to set the scene on exactly who Andrew Luster was.
Right. Andrew Luster was the great-grandson of the cosmetics giant Max Factor.
So we are talking about immense generational, untouchable wealth.
But Luster was, according to the court documents, an absolute monster.
He was. He was on trial in California for drugging and raping multiple women. The prosecution presented evidence that he used GHB, the date rape drug, to incapacitate his victims. It was a highly publicized, lurid, and disturbing trial.
But then, right in the middle of the legal proceedings during a recess in the trial, he just vanished.
He fled the country. He completely absconded. The court actually proceeded to convict him in absentia.
Meaning they finished the trial and found him guilty even though he wasn't physically in the courtroom.
Correct. They convicted him on 86 separate counts. He was facing a 125-year prison sentence. So overnight, he became practically public enemy number one. The FBI was searching globally. The U.S. Marshals were hunting him. Everyone was looking.
And then, entering from stage left, here comes Dog.
Here comes Dog. It's June of 2003. Chapman, his son Leland, and his associate Tim Chapman, who, we should quickly clarify for the listener, is of no blood relation to Dog despite sharing the last name.
Right, just a professional associate.
Exactly. So the three of them decide they're going to do what the combined forces of the federal government couldn't do. They're going to find Andrew Luster.
And what's fascinating in the sources is how they did it. They didn't use advanced satellite tracking or complex financial forensics.
No, they used basic street smarts. They deeply profiled his identity. They knew Luster was a dedicated surfer. That was his core lifestyle. So they didn't waste time looking for hidden bank accounts. They looked for good waves.
They started canvassing popular surf towns down in Mexico.
And they eventually tracked him to Puerto Vallarta.
And on June 18th, 2003, they finally spot him.
The reports vary slightly. Some say it was at a taco stand, others near a motel, but they positively identify him. And they do not call the local Mexican police. They do not alert the FBI liaison.
They just jump
It
in.
was a full-on street brawl. They physically tackled him, fought him, slapped handcuffs on him, and threw him into the back of a van.
They had just captured the most wanted man in America.
They probably thought they were about to be paraded as national heroes. They thought they were simply bringing a monster home to face justice.
But there was a massive, glaring legal problem that they apparently either didn't fully appreciate or they just chose to arrogantly ignore.
Sovereignty.
Right. International borders matter. And the concept of bounty hunting, this commercial bail system where a private citizen is legally allowed to arrest another private citizen for money, is a uniquely American concept.
It really is. In almost every other country on Earth, the idea that you can pay a private company money to get out of jail is completely foreign. And the idea that a private bail company can send a mercenary to cross state or national lines to come get you, that is strictly considered vigilantism.
It's just a crime.
In Mexico, bounty hunting is explicitly illegal. It is classified as deprivation of liberty. To the Mexican legal system, what Dog and his team did wasn't a lawful arrest, it was a kidnapping.
So picture this chaotic scene. They have Andrew Lester bound in the back of the van. They are driving frantically toward the airport or the border. Adrenaline is absolutely pumping. And then in the rearview mirror, they see the flashing red and blue lights.
Mexican police pull the van over, and the local police do not care that the guy tied up in the back is an American fugitive convicted of 86 counts of rape. All they see are 3 heavily tattooed Americans with a bound hostage.
Utter chaos ensues.
Absolute chaos. The police order everyone out. They arrest Luster, which ironically is what ultimately secured his return to the U.S. to serve his 125 years. But they also arrest Dog, Leland, and Tim.
They strip them of all their tactical gear and throw them all into a Mexican jail cell.
Imagine the sheer irony of that moment. You spend months hunting the worst bad guy you can imagine. You finally catch him in a daring daylight raid, and you end up sleeping on the concrete floor in the cell right next to him.
And from reading the diplomatic reports, it was a very real possibility they were going to stay in that prison for a long time. They were formally charged with kidnapping.
They were denied bail initially. The situation was dire. It was only after Dog's wife, Beth, whipped up an absolute media frenzy back in the States, getting on every major cable news talk show, rallying public support, framing her husband as a hero, that a judge in Mexico finally granted them bail.
And this is where the story gets even wilder. Because once they paid that bail and got out of the cell, what did they do?
They ran. Acting on the explicit advice of their American attorneys, they fled Mexico and crossed the border back into the U.S. immediately.
So now, Duane Chapman, the most famous bounty hunter in the world, is technically an international bail jumper himself.
You literally cannot write fiction like this.
So is that where the Mexico saga ended? They just stayed safe in the U.S. and ignored the Mexican courts?
Not at all. And this is where the true gravity of international law finally hit home. Fast forward to 2006. 3 full years later, the statute of limitations on those Mexican kidnapping charges is about to expire.
And suddenly, early one morning, heavily armed agents show up at Dog's sprawling home in Honolulu.
U.S. Marshals.
U.S. Marshals arresting Dog the bounty hunter.
Yes, acting on behalf of the Mexican government. Because there is a formal extradition treaty between the United States and Mexico. Mexico officially said, we want him back on our soil to stand trial for kidnapping.
So the marshals arrested Dog, his son Leland, and Tim.
They were handcuffed, put in leg shackles, and thrown into federal detention in Honolulu.
Dog later said in media interviews, "You never want to go to a federal prison because it's terrible." And the sources note he was genuinely terrified he was going to be put on a plane and shipped to a Mexican prison for a decade.
This arrest sparked a massive, unprecedented diplomatic struggle. It wasn't just a quirky legal issue anymore. It became a high-stakes political football in Washington.
You had the American public saying, he caught a serial rapist, the man is a hero.
But then you had the international legal experts saying, he broke the sovereign law of an allied nation. We have to honor the extradition treaty.
I remember seeing the news footage of this. The lobbying effort went all the way to the top levels of government.
It did. You had 29 Republican congressmen drafting and signing a formal letter directly to Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice.
They were demanding that she block the extradition.
Their core argument was essentially, why on earth are we sending an American hero to rot in a Mexican prison for successfully doing the job the FBI failed to do.
Which is a very emotionally powerful narrative for the public. But legally, Mexico was holding firm, saying, hey, our laws are our laws. You can't just cross our border and play cowboy.
Exactly. It perfectly highlights the Wild West nature of the American bounty hunting industry. When Dog took his private operation international, he collided head-on with a structured legal system that viewed him simply as an armed criminal, not a sanctioned enforcer.
So how did they finally get out of it? Did Condoleezza Rice actually intervene?
It was actually a Mexican court that ultimately resolved it, likely due to a combination of intense international political pressure and some procedural errors in the prosecution. A lengthy, very expensive legal battle played out in the courts, and finally, in 2007, a Mexican judge dismissed the criminal charges.
Because the statute of limitations had indeed officially expired.
Right. But for a solid year there, it looked very, very likely that Dog would be serving time in Mexico.
Talk about high stakes.
Uh-huh.
But this entire incident, the capture of Andrew Luster, as incredibly stressful and legally perilous as it was, this is the exact catalyst that launched the reality television empire, right?
Absolutely. The Luster capture made him a household name overnight. He was featured on a very popular true crime show called Dominic Dunn's Power, Privilege, and Justice.
And the television executives were watching.
A&E executives saw the raw footage of this guy. They saw this rugged, rough-talking biker with the long hair, the intense family dynamic, the sheer charisma, and they saw dollar signs.
So in 2004, Dog the Bounty Hunter premieres on A&E.
And the rest is television history. 8 massive seasons.
They even had that iconic theme song performed by Ozzy Osbourne. I can literally hear it playing in my head right now.
The dog is on the prowl. It became a true cultural phenomenon. But I think when we analyze the source material and the show's structure, we have to give immense credit to the dynamic that made it work. It wasn't just Dog running around chasing bad guys.
It was the Dog and Beth show.
It really was. We have to talk about Beth Chapman. Because she wasn't just the supportive wife standing in the background. She was a total force of nature.
She was his equal business partner. In many ways, reading through the accounts, she was the structural anchor of the entire operation.
Exactly. Dog was the charismatic hunter, the muscle out on the street, knocking down doors and physically tackling fugitives. But Beth ran the logistics.
She ran the actual bail bond office.
She controlled the money, she managed the risk, and frankly, she controlled the boys.
The television show expertly highlighted that specific family business dynamic. The constant bickering, the fierce loyalty, the pure chaos of it all. It was almost like watching the Osbournes mixed with an episode of Cop Yes.
That is the perfect comparison. You had the sons heavily involved, Leland and Duane Lee. You had baby Lissa learning the ropes. It felt like a family sitcom, but the stakes were real people facing real jail time.
And the television audience completely ate up that mix of toughness and tenderness. I mean, Dog would violently mace a guy, tackle him into the dirt, slap handcuffs on him, and then 5 minutes later, he's giving the guy a cigarette and a stern, tearful lecture about finding Jesus.
No ice in paradise.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was his famous catchphrase to the crystal meth addicts he was catching in Hawaii.
Right. And the reason that bizarre dynamic actually worked, the reason the criminals often ended up thanking him on camera as they were being hauled off to jail, was because they intuitively knew he wasn't a clean-cut cop.
He was one of them.
He'd been in the penitentiary. He had been an addict himself. He freely admitted to being a terrible father and a failed husband at various points in his life.
So he was preaching this message of redemption because he was actively, visibly seeking it for himself on screen.
It's the classic psychological archetype of the wounded healer. Or, in his specific case, maybe the wounded hunter.
He projects this overwhelming image of macho strength and absolute authority, but the entire foundation of his appeal is built on his own past failures.
Precisely. However, that era, that highly lucrative golden era of Dog and Beth dominating cable television, it came to a really devastating and tragic end.
It did. The sources detail that in 2017, Beth was diagnosed with throat cancer.
And they made a very deliberate, difficult choice to film her battle with the disease.
The footage was incredibly raw. It wasn't glossed over. The viewers saw her physical decline. We saw Dog's absolute vulnerability and terror at losing her, and she tragically passed away in June of 2019.
I think for a massive portion of their viewership, that was a genuinely heartbreaking cultural moment. You suddenly realize that behind all the exaggerated TV personas, this was a real couple that had survived everything together. Prison scares, massive fame, brutal family feuds.
And losing her seemed to completely unmoor him.
It shifted the entire landscape of his public identity. He was still the Dog, But without Beth there to balance him out, the dynamic was fundamentally broken. She was his moral and business compass. And frankly, his public life since her passing has become even more chaotic and fraught with controversy.
Well, speaking of chaos and controversy, we absolutely cannot do a comprehensive deep dive on Duane Chapman without addressing the scandals. And looking at the timeline, there are some massive ones.
Yes.
We have to talk about the 2007 scandal. This was the specific moment that almost ended his entire career permanently.
This is the infamous racial slur scandal. In October of 2007, a private recorded phone call between Dog and his son, Tucker, was leaked and sold to the National Enquirer.
Tucker actually sold the tape of his own father.
He did.
And the content of that phone call was incredibly ugly.
It was completely indefensible. The context was that Tucker was dating a black woman. And in the secret recording, Dog is heard repeatedly using the N-word to describe her.
He was expressing deep vitriolic disdain for the fact that his son was in an interracial relationship.
Right. And it's important to note, based on the transcript of the call, this wasn't just a slip of the tongue. It wasn't him absent-mindedly quoting a song.
Yo.
He wasn't just using the word casually. He was expressing a rigid worldview that was explicitly racist in that moment. He was furiously talking about how having a black person in the family would negatively affect his television brand and his financial livelihood.
The corporate fallout was immediate and severe. A&E pulled the show off the air.
They suspended production instantly. Major advertisers fled the network. Dog was forced into aggressive damage control mode.
He issued a very public apology, but his defense of his actions was, well, it was interesting, to say the least.
How so? Walk us through his logic there.
Well, according to his public statements, he claimed that while he absolutely shouldn't have used the word, he felt he had somehow earned a pass to use it. Yes. He essentially argued that because he had spent time in a Texas prison alongside black inmates, and because he worked in the gritty bail bond industry, which disproportionately deals with minority communities, he felt comfortable with the language. He actually said that no black person had ever told him they were offended by his use of the word in the past.
Which heavily implies he had used it in the past quite comfortably.
That was the clear implication. So to rehabilitate his image, he eventually organized meetings with several prominent African-American organizations to publicly make amends.
And surprisingly, it worked. A&E reinstated the show in 2008.
Why do you think they brought him back? Usually in media, a tape like that is a permanent career ender.
It's cynical, but it's entirely about understanding the audience. Dog's core demographic at the time wasn't necessarily the polished, politically correct crowd. They viewed him as a deeply flawed, rough-around-the-edges anti-hero.
So the controversy almost validated his authenticity to them.
In a weird way, yes. It reinforced his outlaw status. He wasn't a polished Hollywood elite. He was a real gritty guy, even if being real in that instance meant revealing deep prejudices.
And he hasn't exactly steered clear of this topic in recent years either.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Fast forward to 2021, he gave a televised interview where he adamantly denied being a racist, and he bizarrely used the line, "I have more black friends than Eminem."
Oh boy. That is certainly a choice of words.
It suggests a profound lack of growth, or at the very least, a lack of understanding of why people were so fundamentally upset in the first place. And this specific pattern of behavior connects directly to a much more recent controversy involving a television show that never even made it to air.
Right. The show was called Dog Unleashed.
Yes. This was supposed to be his massive comeback vehicle in 2021 on a new streaming platform. But it got abruptly canceled before a single episode was broadcast.
Why was it pulled?
The production company actually sued him for breach of contract. They alleged that during the filming, which, by the way, included his highly publicized independent search for Brian Laundrie, the fugitive in the tragic Gabby Petito case, the producers discovered Chapman was in illegal possession of a taser.
Wait, a taser? Can he legally have a taser?
That's the complex legal gray area. As a convicted felon, as we discussed, he absolutely cannot possess a firearm. But in many strict jurisdictions, tasers and stun guns are also heavily restricted for violent felons.
So the production company panicked.
They claimed he was actively carrying it and using it on camera, which put the entire production company at massive legal and insurance risk.
But it wasn't just the taser, right? There were more accusations in that lawsuit regarding offensive language.
Yes, the lawsuit also formally alleged he made racist and homophobic comments to the crew on set. And this specific lawsuit caused a massive, highly public rift within his own family.
With his daughter, Bonnie.
Right. Bonnie Chapman publicly released a statement saying that the production company's allegations were entirely true. She stated point blank that her father was racist and homophobic, and she announced she was permanently distancing herself from him.
And what was Dog's response to his own daughter saying that?
He denied all of it. He went to the press and claimed Bonnie was being manipulated by malicious people who just wanted to destroy his career. He essentially accused his own child of being brainwashed by his corporate enemies.
It was a very public, very ugly family feud playing out in the tabloids.
It was. And this naturally brings us to his recent pivot into politics. Because over the last few years, Dog hasn't just been a reality star trying to get back on TV. He's actively become a right-wing political commentator.
He has leaned very heavily into partisan politics. For example, he is a very vocal opponent of bail reform.
Which makes perfect sense, strictly from a professional standpoint. We should probably explain the mechanics of this for the listener.
Please do. Bail reform generally means eliminating cash bail for nonviolent offenses, right?
Exactly. The core philosophy of bail reform is that impoverished people shouldn't sit in a jail cell for months before trial just because they can't afford a $500 bail, while wealthy people accused of the same crime can just pay to go free.
But for a commercial bail bondsman,
For a bail bondsman, the cash bail system is the entire product. If suspects are released on their own recognizance by a judge, bail bondsmen simply do not make any money. The industry dies. So, Dog views legislative bail reform as an existential threat to his livelihood.
so he actually lobbied against it.
Aggressively. He traveled to state houses in New Jersey and Colorado, arguing forcefully that bail reform actively endangers the public.
And according to the sources, what's his argument?
He paints a very vivid picture of lawlessness. He argues that without the financial accountability of a bail bondsman tracking them down, criminals are just being let loose to reoffend.
It's a very emotionally powerful argument if you're a citizen who is fearful of rising crime rates, even if the sociological data on bail reform is much more nuanced.
Right, but his recent political involvement goes way beyond just protecting his business interests.
It does. The sources note that at an evangelical Christian conference in 2022, he gave a highly charged speech where he referred to President Biden as Little Hitler.
Little Hitler, that is a massive rhetorical escalation.
And again, we're just impartially reporting what the source material states, he said. He also used that platform to allege that the 2020 presidential election was stolen via widespread voter fraud.
He has completely embraced that narrative.
And in a separate media interview, when he was asked if he would be willing to serve in a hypothetical second Donald Trump administration, he stated he would very much like to be appointed as the deportation czar.
Deportation czar. Well, it certainly fits his brand, I suppose. The ultimate hunter of men.
It fits the aggressive brand, absolutely, but it also permanently alienates a huge portion of his original television audience. He's transitioned from being a general, widely loved pop culture figure, the funny, tough guy with the mullet, to a very specific, highly partisan political figure.
He's completely doubling down on the authoritarian enforcer identity.
Let's pivot back to the personal life to wrap this up, because we mentioned the terrible family rift with Bonnie. But looking at the biographical timeline, that is just the tip of the iceberg. If you think his professional and political life is messy, his marital history is an absolute labyrinth.
It is a chronological web that almost requires a visual flowchart to fully understand. Dog has been married 6 times.
6 marriages. Okay, let's run through this rapid fire to give the listener a true sense of the timeline and the chaos. Who was the first?
LaFonda Sue Honeycutt. This is way back in the 1970s. They had 2 children together, Duane Lee and Leland.
And how did that end?
She actually filed for divorce while he was sitting in the Texas penitentiary serving his sentence for the murder conviction.
Ouch. Getting served divorce papers while serving time, that is a rough double whammy.
Next was Ann Tegnell. He met her shortly after he was paroled from prison. Now, this one is legally very controversial. She was 17 years old. He was in his late 20s. The source documents indicate he was deeply worried about facing statutory rape charges or having his parole revoked because she was a minor and they were intimately involved.
So what did he do?
So, legally, he married her to avoid the criminal charges.
Wait, he married a teenager specifically to keep himself out of jail.
That is what the historical record suggests. He even admitted in later interviews that he didn't actually love her at the time. It was strictly a practical solution to a looming legal problem.
That is incredibly dark.
It is. Then came marriage number 3 to Lissa Ray Britton. He reportedly met her in a bar. And the story goes, and this is Dog's own telling of the event in his book, he walked up to her, and offered her $1,000 to have his child.
Wait, what? He just walked up to a complete stranger in a bar and offered cold hard cash for a baby.
Essentially, yes. He was desperate to rebuild the family structure he felt he had lost. They ended up marrying just days later. They had 3 kids together, including baby Lissa and Tucker, the son who later leaked the audio tape. But the marriage was highly volatile, and it ended in divorce in 1991.
Which brings us to number 4.
Tawny Marie, this is objectively one of the wildest stories in the timeline, he actually arrested her.
He arrested his own future wife.
Yes. He arrested her on a warrant for drug possession. Then, after she was processed, he hired her to work as his secretary at the bail bond office. And then he married her.
That sounds like a massive conflict of interest.
He later described the entire marriage as a disaster due to her ongoing severe drug addiction. They officially divorced in 2002.
Which finally brings us to Beth.
Beth Smith, the true love of his life. They had a chaotic on and off relationship for years while he was married to or dating other people, but they finally officially married in 2006.
And they were together until her tragic death in 2019.
Yes.
And now, who is marriage number 6?
Now he is married to Francie Frayne. They tied the knot in 2021. They actually bonded over the fact that they were both recently widowed. Her husband had passed away just months before Beth died.
And amidst all these 6 marriages, there are 13 children in total. And there has been so much profound tragedy in that family tree.
Incredible tragedy. He lost a son, Zebediah, who was born prematurely and died as an infant during his brief marriage to Anne. And then there is the heartbreaking story of his daughter, Barbara Katie.
What happened there?
She died in a horrific car accident in Alaska. And the timing is just brutal. It happened the exact day before Dog and Beth's highly publicized wedding in Hawaii in 2006.
The day before the wedding.
The day before. Imagine the sheer emotional whiplash of that moment. They actually had to make the agonizing decision to go ahead with the wedding ceremony, and they broke the devastating news to the guests at the reception.
It perfectly highlights that intense cycle we talked about earlier. Extreme, televised highs mixed with absolutely devastating private lows.
And recently, the family dynamic shifted again. He found out he has another son.
Yes, John. Born to an ex-girlfriend who tragically committed suicide back in the 1970s. Dog didn't know about him and met him for the very first time in 2023. So this massive family tree is just constantly expanding and shifting. It honestly seems like for every broken person he saves on the street for the television cameras, there is a core relationship in his own private life that is deeply fractured.
That is the ultimate paradox of Duane Chapman. And I think analytically, that is exactly why he made for such compelling television for over a decade. He positioned himself as a flawed father figure to the desperate criminals he caught.
He would tackle them, handcuff them, wipe the dirt off their face, and tell them he loved them.
It's a very specific, very aggressive type of street ministry.
It is.
He could look a hardcore meth addict dead in the eye and say, I've been exactly where you are. I've been locked in the penitentiary. I've been high out of my mind. I've lost my own kids. And the addict believes him because it's the verifiable truth.
He isn't judging them from a pristine moral pedestal.
No, he's judging them from the exact same gutter he just managed to crawl out of.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, looking at all the court docs, the marriages, the TV empire, the politics, what do we ultimately make of Duane "Dog" Chapman?
I think he is a walking Rorschach test for how you view the American justice system. To some people listening, he is an absolute hero, a man who fearlessly does the dangerous, dirty work that the actual police can't or won't do, a man who proves that you can come back from rock bottom and build an empire.
And to others?
To others, he is a dangerous, chaotic vigilante, a man with deeply prejudiced views who got a cultural pass simply because he was highly entertaining, a man who built a fortune profiting off the misery of addiction and poverty while his own life is continually in shambles, a man who glorifies a Wild West mentality that legally has no place in a modern society.
It really is an inescapable cycle with him, isn't it? Do the wrong thing, face the severe consequence, reinvent yourself for the cameras, find massive controversy, and repeat.
It is the defining cycle of his entire life. From the murder conviction in Texas, to the international incident with the luster capture, to the ugly slur scandal, to the Dog Unleashed lawsuits. He constantly burns his own life down and then furiously tries to build it back up.
It leaves us with a pretty provocative question for you, the listener, to mull over. We love a second chance story in America. We are obsessed with the comeback arc. But where exactly do we draw the line?
Right. Does physically catching the bad guy miraculously absolve the hunter of being one himself?
Or is Dog the Bounty Hunter just a character, a lucrative costume that allows Duane Chapman to constantly outrun his own shadow?
That is definitely something to chew on.
It really is. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the wild, contradictory life of the dog. Stay curious, and we'll catch you on the next one.